It's considered to be the earliest high culture of Central America. Everybody's heard about the Aztecs. Everybody's heard about the Maya.
Every paternal bloodline gone, completely erased. That's the shocking conclusion genetic researchers reached after examining ancient DNA from civilizations that existed long before the Aztecs. The Olmec, the Maya, the Toltec, and the builders of Teotihuacan. Their Y chromosome lineages, passed from father to son for generations, had vanished from the genetic record as if they had never existed at all. But the women remained. According to ancient traditions, Teotihuacan was the sacred place where the gods created humanity itself, where the world was formed and where the sun, known as the fifth sun, first came into being. For years, author Graham Hancock argued that entire civilizations had been deliberately erased from history. Mainstream scholars dismissed him, labeling his ideas speculation and refusing to take them seriously. Then the genetic evidence arrived, and suddenly his claims didn't seem so impossible. The Aztecs, it turns out, may not have simply conquered territory. Genetic patterns suggest something far more unsettling. They may have replaced the lost fathers of entire populations. Historically, the Aztec Empire expanded through warfare, alliances, and political strategy, eventually dominating much of central and southern Mexico by the early 1500s. But beneath that rise lies a darker story, one written not in stone monuments, but in human DNA. The impossible discovery. In 2015, geneticist Pontus Skoglund at Harvard University was analyzing ancient remains from the Amazon basin. His research focused on understanding human origins and the evolutionary history of disease using large-scale genomic data. Then his computer produced a result that shouldn't have existed. The DNA contained genetic markers linked to Aboriginal Australians, populations located on the opposite side of the planet. According to conventional archaeology, this was impossible. For decades, textbooks taught a simple story. Humans entered the Americas around 15,000 years ago via a Siberian land bridge. One migration, one ancestral group. A clean, uncomplicated timeline repeated in universities, museums, and documentaries worldwide. But this genetic signal told a different story. It appeared to predate the Siberian migration entirely. Aztec origin stories speak of a northern homeland called Chicomostoc, a mythical cave with 7 chambers representing 7 tribes. Yet the DNA hinted at something even older, something arriving across the Pacific Ocean long before accepted timelines allowed. Skoglund checked the data again. And again. The signal remained. Even stranger, it wasn't spread evenly across the Americas. It appeared strongest in the Amazon region while nearly disappearing elsewhere, a pattern suggesting ancient populations that were once widespread but later replaced or absorbed. Wave after wave of newcomers arrived, mixing with earlier inhabitants and gradually erasing those who came before. For years, Hancock had proposed exactly this kind of forgotten population history. Critics called it pseudoscience. Now genetics was beginning to echo the same possibility, and nowhere does this mystery appear more clearly than in Mesoamerica, the region that would later become the heart of the Aztec Empire. The erased fathers, when researcher National Autonomous University of Mexico, scientists analyzed Y chromosome data from ancient Mesoamerican remains. The results were deeply unsettling. The paternal lineages of the Olmec, the early Maya, the Toltec, and the builders of Teotihuacan had disappeared. Not weakened, not diluted, gone. The genetic chains that should have passed from fathers to sons across hundreds of generations simply stopped, as if entire family trees had been cut away from history. Yet maternal DNA told a different story. Female lineages continued uninterrupted. Women survived societal collapses, becoming part of new communities and carrying their ancestry forward through future generations. The pattern was unmistakable. This wasn't slow cultural blending over centuries. The genetic breaks aligned precisely with periods of sudden civilizational collapse, moments of violence, upheaval, and transformation. Entire male populations vanished while women were absorbed into emerging societies. If you want to keep uncovering hidden truths buried inside ancient DNA, make sure to subscribe now, because this mystery is only just beginning. The Teotihuacan catastrophe. One case stands above the rest: Teotihuacan. At its height, this massive city was home to more than 125,000 people, rivaling ancient Rome in scale and influence. Its pyramids still rise above the landscape today, silent monuments hinting at an event history has never fully explained. Its power once shaped all of Mesoamerica, and yet something happened there, something devastating enough to leave echoes not only in ruins, but in human genetics itself. Trade items marked with its symbols have been discovered hundreds of kilometers away, proof of how far its influence once reached. When the Aztecs arrived centuries later, they believed the city had not been built by humans at all. To them, it was divine, a sacred place they called the city where men became gods. Some early stories even described its ancient inhabitants as unusually pale, leading some to believe they were messengers sent by the gods themselves. Then, around 550 AD, everything ended, and the genetic evidence reads less like history and more like a forensic report from a crime scene. Temples left smoldering, blood staining the stones of public plazas. Monuments smashed with an intensity that suggested rage rather than simple conquest. Statues mutilated. Sacred spaces burned deliberately, and within a single generation, new men were walking those same streets. Different fathers, different bloodlines, different Y chromosomes. The genetic shift wasn't gradual. It didn't take centuries. It happened almost overnight. Imagine an entire city where fathers, brothers, and sons disappear, replaced by strangers who inherit their homes, occupy their temples, and take their place within society. The women, however, remained. Their mitochondrial DNA shows clear continuity before and after the collapse. They survived and became part of whatever new order emerged. But the male population was systematically replaced. Geneticist Andres Moreno Estrada described analyzing this data as watching a crime unfold in genetic slow motion. And Teotihuacan was not an isolated case. Across the Maya heartland, researchers found the same pattern. Genetic breaks align perfectly with the classic Maya collapse. Toltec genetic signatures disappear following the fall of their empire. Civilization after civilization experienced the same fate. Across thousands of years and an entire continent, the pattern repeats. Male lineages erased while female ancestry continues uninterrupted. War explains part of this. Ancient warfare often meant men were killed while women were taken as captives or wives. Over generations, conquerors' Y chromosomes replaced those of defeated populations while maternal DNA survived. The conquerors became fathers. The conquered became genetic shadows. But the scale seen in Mesoamerica goes far beyond ordinary warfare. This was not a single catastrophe. It was a recurring cycle, a nightmare replayed again and again across centuries. Each collapse created a genetic vacuum. Each vacuum was filled by newcomers, and eventually those newcomers were erased as well, until one final group stepped into the empty space. The Aztec genetic ascension. The timing of the Aztec rise feels almost too precise to be coincidence. According to their own traditions, the Mexica people wandered for generations searching for a homeland. They claimed to come from a mythical place called Aztlan, guided by their god Huitzilopochtli, who instructed them to look for a specific sign, an eagle perched on a cactus devouring a snake. In 1325, they found that sign on an island in Lake Texcoco. There, they founded Tenochtitlan, and their rise was explosive. But here's the unsettling part. When the Aztecs arrived, they entered a land already shattered by centuries of collapse and conflict. Earlier civilizations had fractured repeatedly. Their paternal bloodlines had been broken and replaced multiple times. Some researchers quietly wonder whether this timing was truly accidental, or whether the Mexica migrations placed them strategically into a region already weakened and ready for domination. We cannot prove intent, but the coincidence is difficult to ignore. Into this fractured genetic landscape came the Aztecs with intact male lineages, a unified population whose paternal ancestry had not yet been shattered by conquest. They arrived as a coherent genetic force entering a land of fragmented bloodlines, and they moved with astonishing speed. Within just 2 centuries, they built one of the greatest cities on earth. Tenochtitlan grew larger than London or Paris at the time. When Spanish conquistadors first saw it in 1519, rising from the waters of the lake, many believed they were dreaming. Soldier Bernal Diaz del Castillo later wrote that the sight felt unreal, as if the army were witnessing a vision rather than a city. Causeways stretched across the water linking island and mainland. Aqueducts carried fresh water across miles. Floating gardens, known as chinampas, fed hundreds of thousands of people. Massive pyramids dominated the skyline, their steps still marked by fresh ritual sacrifices. But beneath this extraordinary achievement lay a darker foundation. As the Aztec Empire expanded, their paternal lineages spread rapidly across central Mexico. Aztec men married women from conquered populations, merging their Y chromosomes with maternal lines that had survived earlier collapses. New fathers replaced forgotten ones, and slowly, the genetic map of an entire region was rewritten. Within only a few generations, Aztec paternal lineage spread across nearly every corner of their expanding empire. This was more than military domination or political control. It was a transformation written directly into human DNA, a genetic takeover on a massive continental scale. Research led by Dr. Alexander Ioannidis at Stanford examined city-states that came under Aztec rule, revealing striking genetic changes. After conquest, Y chromosome patterns shifted dramatically, sometimes in the span of a single generation. Entire local gene pools were reshaped almost overnight. Genetic evidence shows women from conquered regions appearing in samples taken from the Aztec heartland, pointing to large-scale movement of female populations toward the empire's center. The pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Cities were conquered, local male populations were killed or displaced, women were absorbed into Aztec society, and the cycle repeated again and again. The Aztecs filled demographic voids left behind by earlier collapses. They became the new paternal lineages of lands whose original fathers had vanished from history. For nearly a century, the Aztecs dominated central Mexico. Yet at the height of their power, a fatal turning point approached, one that would make their collapse inevitable. They were not simply constructing an empire based on tribute or territory. They were building an empire of ancestry, spreading their bloodlines across vast regions as their paternal heritage expanded farther than their armies alone could reach. And they possessed an unexpected tool that accelerated this expansion: Nahuatl, the Aztec language. When Spanish explorers first arrived, they were astonished by how widely Nahuatl was spoken. Traders used it. Messengers carried it across long distances. Markets from northern Mexico deep into Central America echoed with the same words and expressions. The language had traveled far beyond direct Aztec military control. Language moves with people, and wherever Nahuatl spread, Aztec genetic influence followed. Merchants, soldiers, priests and administrators carried both culture and ancestry wherever they went. DNA evidence supports this connection. Regions linked through Nahuatl trade networks show clear signs of migration, intermarriage, and genetic blending across great distances. The Aztecs were not only conquering land, they were quietly reshaping the biological future of an entire civilization. But the story does not begin or end with the Aztecs. The mysterious Australasian genetic signal that sparked this investigation reaches far deeper into the past. It predates the Aztecs, predates the Maya, and even predates known Mesoamerican civilizations. It hints at migrations or contacts dating back to humanity's earliest arrival in the Americas, possibly more than 15,000 years ago. Genetic replacement, it seems, was not a recent phenomenon. It was a recurring pattern stretching back to the beginning. For thousands of years, populations were repeatedly transformed. Waves of newcomers arriving, older male lineages disappearing, and genetic histories rewritten again and again. The Aztecs were simply the latest chapter in a much older cycle of erasure and renewal. For decades, writer Graham Hancock argued that entire civilizations had been wiped from history, that humanity's past was far more violent and mysterious than conventional narratives allowed. His ideas were dismissed, criticized, even mocked by mainstream archaeology. Yet modern DNA evidence now reveals something undeniable. Entire bloodlines were systematically replaced across millennia. Not symbolically, but biologically. Fathers and sons vanished from the genetic record, replaced repeatedly over thousands of years, echoing predictions long considered controversial. What happened to the men of Teotihuacan? Who replaced them? What forces drove these recurring waves of genetic upheaval? And why did the Aztecs emerge precisely when their intact male lineages offered such an advantage? These questions are no longer purely academic. They resemble investigations at a crime scene. Geneticist Dr. David Reich of Harvard summarized it bluntly. We are only beginning to grasp the scale of violence embedded within human genetic history. Violence preserved in DNA itself, written into the bloodlines of survivors and overlooked until genetic science made it impossible to ignore. Unlike earlier civilizations, however, the Aztecs never completed their expansion. Their rise was abruptly halted. In 1519, the arrival of the Spanish changed everything. European diseases devastated populations. Advanced weaponry shattered Aztec military resistance. Colonization dismantled the empire before its genetic expansion could fully unfold. Their empire, territorial and biological, ended before its final chapter could be written. Yet their genetic legacy never disappeared. Today, millions of people still carry Aztec ancestry, living proof of bloodlines that spread across Mesoamerica during the empire's short but powerful century of dominance. The genetic empire they forged in barely 100 years endured through 5 centuries of colonization, epidemics, and intentional cultural destruction. The Spanish burned codices, demolished temples, and outlawed religious traditions. They attempted to erase an entire civilization's identity. But one thing they could not destroy was DNA. Aztec Y chromosome lineages remain present today, still widespread, still shaping the genetic landscape of Mexico and much of Central America. Long after the empire fell, its biological imprint survived. For decades, Graham Hancock challenged accepted history with uncomfortable ideas. He argued that the historical record was incomplete, that catastrophic events wiped away evidence, that migrations occurred which mainstream archaeology resisted acknowledging. Now, genetic research is beginning to produce answers that are just as unsettling as the questions themselves. Not every theory Hancock proposed has been proven correct, but his central claim, that human history is far more complex than traditional narratives suggest, is gaining unexpected support. DNA evidence shows populations repeatedly disappearing and being replaced, and it reveals that the Americas may hold mysteries far stranger than textbooks ever allowed. Which leads to a question that lingers long after the story ends. If the Aztec Empire rose upon the remains of erased bloodlines, how many other civilizations share the same hidden foundation? How many origin stories mask ancient population replacements? How many empires succeeded not because of divine destiny or superior innovation, but because they arrived at precisely the moment when those who came before had already been eliminated? DNA does not invent stories. It records them. And what it records suggests that human history may be darker, more violent, and far more complicated than we were ever meant to believe. So hit the like button and subscribe. Because this is only the beginning of uncovering what history tried to bury. And if you found this unsettling, just wait until you see what genetic evidence reveals about the builders of the Egyptian pyramids.